I'm fascinated to see where that number is. Last year, we saw 64% of companies either didn't have ethical guidelines or didn't know of ethical guidelines, which I always say is the exact same thing. If you don't know about the guidelines, then they don't exist. So I'll be very interested to see how that breaks down, because I would have been shocked too to see the number of hands that went up. That's pretty interesting. Like I said, it's always fascinating to see how this sort of evolves, right? We have new challenges, and so we've got new tools to face those challenges, and that's what we're here to do, right? That's our mandate.
Welcome to the HR Huddle podcast, presented by Sapient Insights Group, the ultimate resource for all things HR. It's time to get in the huddle.
Welcome, everyone, to Spill the Tea on HR Tech, where we focus on the hottest HR tech news everyone needs to know to be in the know. We break down the news of the week and help you make sense of what it means for our industry and how it could impact your organization. And we're working today on June 19th, 2025, Juneteenth. Although we are celebrating along with everyone else on this federal holiday, we still do have to get some things done so that we can get them out and published for everyone this week. I'm your host, Stacey Harris, Chief Research Officer and Managing Partner for Sapient Insights Group, a research and advisory firm. And joining me today as my co-host, Cliff Stevenson, Director of Research and Principal Analyst for Sapient Insights Group. Cliff, welcome to the show. We're going to try and make this work because we're both virtual today and we've got some audio and video kind of glitches going on, but we think we're going to make it this time, right?
It's sounding good. It's sounding good. For those of you that are on the podcast, hopefully you're not hearing too much disruption. For those of you on the video, it may just be some still shots in certain cases. But, I'm hoping that you're not just coming to see our pretty faces. You're really more interested in what we have to say, right? So let's focus on that. We are both, this is a road show. Both of us, you are in Dallas? Is that right?
Yeah.
Tell me where you're at.
I'm in Dallas today. It's very warm. I'm at the Ritz-Carlton in Dallas. Can't complain, but the internet's a little bit sketchy.
And I'm in Las Vegas here for the iSolved partner and sales kickoff events, which they've separated from the sort of main customer event. We can talk about that. But yeah, also very warm here. I think we're at 108, so no chance of us filming outside today.
Yeah. Well, it's a busy week with a lot of stuff to cover, Cliff. But before we jump into all of the great tea that we've got, we should talk about all the events. And as you had noted, I'm here today. We'll talk a little bit about why I'm in Dallas this week. I'm at the Dayforce Enterprise Customer Executive Summit, which is a very curated group of organizations that the Dayforce organization brings together to talk about the challenges that the executives have at the larger company sizes. So we'll talk a little bit about that, but also for everyone, and as Cliff mentioned, he's at the iSolved event this week out in Las Vegas. But we have a lot of upcoming events too. So if you're looking to kind of catch up with us, want to know where we're going to be at. And next week, I'll be heading out to New Orleans for all my New Orleans peeps. And we'll be at the WeBank conference. You might not know what that is. That's a Women's Business Enterprise National Council. We're doing a little bit of presentations. We're getting out to meet a couple of our customers and just really supporting an association that we've been part of for a very long time because we are a women-owned business and certified in that. Also, in September 3rd, I'll be doing the ADP Innovation Day in New York City. So anybody in our New York City area who would like to touch base with us, we're going to be out there. I'm very excited about that because we're interested in seeing where ADP is at, particularly with the Lyric product. So we'll get some updates there. And then Cliff, both you and I will be at the HR Tech event in September 15th through 18th in Las Vegas. If you don't know about HR Tech, we recommend you find out about it. It's going to be the big place where we have the big reveal for our key findings of the HR systems survey. And for those who are still scheduling their flights and everything, make sure you stay through Wednesday morning. Our session is Thursday morning. So stay through Thursday morning. You even have it right here in front of me. Through Thursday morning, our session is at 8 in the morning. We'll have a Q&A right after that session down on the floor. We really want you to join and hear what's happening in those findings because there are some things we share there that we don't share elsewhere. And then Cliff will also possibly be doing the Dayforce Discover event. That's another user conference, 7th and 8th in Las Vegas. And then you're going to be at the Oracle Cloud event, October 12th and 13th in Las Vegas, correct?
That's right. We've done those multiple years. Those ones are very large along with HR Tech. And it's a great place to come up to us, to meet with us, to ask some questions, and especially reiterating the keynote that you're giving at HR Tech I know I said it last episode. If for whatever reason you're just joining us now, please do try to get there early. It is the most heavily attended event there. And it's the hottest of tea. You talk about spilling tea. This is when the data comes out and you're the first people to hear it. So all this stuff that we were talking about, like the adoption of AI and that growth, we talked about that last year. That was at that kickoff or that that keynote. It's a really cool event. Do not miss it.
Yeah, definitely. And then our November is packed as well. Like usually we kind of slow down in November, but not this year. We will be at the UKG Aspire in Las Vegas. We are still having conversations about doing Unleash, which is also, I think, in November and October in Paris, and we might be attending that. And then we're doing 2 iSolved events again, because they're doing regional events, one in Philadelphia and one in Scottsdale. So if you're interested in November in getting a chance to catch up with us and see some of the new research that we're just launching right now with the iSolved team on and building a strategic HR function and how to reduce the roadblocks in front of your way, that's a good place to do it. And Scottsdale is really nice in the winter, so just an FYI. And then finally, I think the last thing that we're doing is in November, we are also going to be doing the Finance Technology Expo, or the FATE event for finance and accounting organizations and leaders. And that will be put on by the CFO Council in New York. And we're running 4 right now, although we might be adding a few more based on conversations I'm having. Roundtables, sponsored events on HR finance crossover topics. So if you're interested in that, give us a shout out. We'd love to talk to you. We're really excited about this because we think the finance audience is someone that we need to engage a little bit more from an HR perspective. And we have some data to talk about why that is. So,
that's exactly it. We'll be talking about the intersection between finance and HR. We've talked a lot on this show about how we see the software coming together in ways that make sense. We've talked about how we're starting to see roles between HR and IT combining, and we're starting to see finance and HR finally sort of working together and realizing that potential and having the data to really show what that actual use case is and how you can best optimize that coordination between those 2 functions. I think will be really amazing. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's going to be a great event. And thanks for checking in as our audio keeps kind of going back and forth. But let's jump into the tea because we got a lot to cover and probably not as much time as we'd like to today. You were also at another event this weekend, Prism HR, or put on by the Venture Group, right here in Orlando.
Yeah, that was really interesting. That's not too far from where I live. I'm in the Tampa, St. Petersburg area, so it's nice being able to take public transportation, take the train over. It was a really wonderful event. Kicked off, Kevin Andrews, who I met over at Unleash, really talked about how they're expanding. This is a company, Venture, that has had 92 acquisitions in the last 3 years, right? So if you're starting to hear a name that you haven't heard before, and you're wondering, that they're starting to come up. It's not surprising. We've talked about them on this show for that reason, but they're also starting to sell directly to consumers. This is new for them. This had always been through the PEO or the ASO model where you didn't know you were using it. We started seeing it in our survey data, right? Coming up sort of naturally. And they're aware of that, and they're really trying to, get that alignment between how to use HR technology to achieve business outcomes. They're as laser focused on it as we are. So that was really great. And one thing that I did find interesting though, and this was Alex Campos, the CEO of Venture, actually showed me tools that can be used for the ASO PO side. I know I was just hype on the direct to consumer, but some of these tools you think about how we have flight risk models, being able to apply that to your services and to your technology, right? So if you're saying, okay, a certain number of support tickets have been open, or we see that there's a certain average amount of time that leads to people abandoning their software, changing the tech that they use, and being able to apply sort of a flight risk model to the software. That's still in beta, but I did get confirmation I'm allowed to talk about it. They were demoing it, and it was really neat. So along with that, one of the keynotes was Duncan Wardle, who used to be the head of innovation at Disney. Stacey, I know you were very excited. I don't know if you had a chance to speak, but talking about innovation and creativity, it was really interesting. And, bringing that sort of mindset shift is always very interesting sort of stuff to talk about.
Yeah, it's always good to hear some outside perspectives on innovation, right? Yeah. We also did a webinar that we should probably just let everybody know about. That's going to be for UKG on how AI is transforming time, talent, and trust. Cliff, you did that. That's going live July 17th, correct?
That's right. And that one was really another wonderful one because we brought in a lot of the discussions we talk about here on data and how to use data to achieve business outcomes, of course. Sorry to be a broken record here, but also to use it for engaging people and helping people sort of overcome the roadblocks to perhaps using AI, right? And talk about something that has really resonated with me, Stacey, that you've been talking about is using AI for validation, not generation, right? We've seen how when AI fails, it can be very disastrous. So you have to think about risk reward. But if you're using it to do something like checking over a large set of data or your payroll and detecting anomalies, it succeeds wonderfully, in ways that doesn't replace humans. No one likes to check over and try and figure out if there's an extra zero, a pattern that's off. But, it can do that in ways that really help you not mess up somebody's paycheck or not get a time card that's off or something like that. So they then, UKG at the end of it sort of talks about how that is actually used in real life examples. So I love doing ones like that.
Always big things. And I'm okay. I just have to laugh because Cliff just almost fell off his chair is pretty much what I'm seeing in this video. And we do have to admit it because like we're on the road, guys.
Yeah.
All right. We cannot ignore some of the things going on. I've got people screaming over the cube here that I'm in, trying to make the audio legible. So welcome to the road, guys. It's not always as glamorous as it seems.
That's right. We talk a lot about working remotely and working hybrid.
That's right. Speaking of being on the road, you're at ISOL. So, Cliff, tell us a little bit about, we talked a little bit already about the Partner Connect and the SKO, but anything you knew that you've learned this week that we should be aware of?
It's really interesting, right? Because when you do this, where you separate out the partners and the sales group from the customer event, it allows you to have a more focused message, right? Because certain people want to hear certain things. Those of you listening, watching, well, thank you very much for putting up with this, first of all. For those of you listening, you're probably interested in certain types of news or certain aspects, right? So, having that sort of focused message is really important. And so you get up a different sort of crowd reaction at certain times. People, mentioned being able to sort of favorite reporting functions and stuff like that. And I got a huge, gasp from the audience and cheers. And I was like, okay, well, you don't see that a whole lot. But it was really nice bringing the sapient data perspective. We had a nice panel, trends and transformation in the HR industry, talking about a lot of things that regular listeners will know already of how AI is transforming work, or, again, that sort of cluster model of people, the importance of services, another one that got a huge cheer of as a differentiator and as a sort of package as part of that cluster. I did that panel with Tammy Nutt and Pete Tiliakos, all friends of the show. I also attended a session that Tammy did on compliance and AI, speaking of uses of AI that can be a little scary, but how to use AI to help with compliance, especially in a compliance world that seems to be changing, almost at a daily basis in terms of regulation. So that was really great. And also, just a big shout out to Kate Burke, who ran both of those events, going on simultaneously with over 1,000 partners and salespeople. Of course, Amberly Dressler, our friend there. And, we talk about being on the road and getting to do some fun stuff too. I did get to finally see a show at the Sphere, and I really want to apologize personally to Melissa Versnick, who's the head of the iSolve Marketplace, who, instead of me focusing on the show, I'm going, I'm really excited to hear more about how you're expanding your marketplace. We think a lot about the sort of vendor marketplace as a differentiator, and I'm interested in some of the tools that you're seeing that maybe be outside of HR. And she's like, if you could just, the show is really happening right now. There's a giant IMAX happening.
So this is so bad. You're now, we get so zoned in on what we're doing, right?
Yes, exactly. So
yeah. Well, it sounds like you guys had a great time out there, and the 1,000 partners thing, I think, is something that we do have to just stop and pause on that about, because that's a lot for kind of the audience they serve and the groups, like to have them there just in session. That's all, not all that they've got, but it's great to see that kind of support. I was here, it was a little bit of a smaller crowd at Dayforce. They did have a bigger group the day before, but this particular session that I was asked to come in and do the opening key on was for their enterprise large companies at their executive summit, hosted by Colleen Chulis, who's the group vice president of enterprise sales. And she was amazing, by the way. It's always nice to see, people who are up and from the organization who are hosting events. Usually you have sort of sometimes hired talent doing it. Colleen was great. She was so gracious and just did a great job doing it. But I presented on basically managing the chaos strategically, because that's basically where we're at in HR right now. Is it's a bit of chaos, but we've got to manage it strategically. It was a great session that really covered not just some of the stuff that we were seeing today around how enterprise, very large organizations, over 5,000 employees, are handling the changing market of sort of the idea of multiple levels of HR technology and how they're thinking about consolidating that into the platform clusters, as we've been talking about. We also talked about some sneak peeks about what we're seeing in the data already around AI, and some of the biggest conversations that was definitely really resonating with the audience was this sort of balance between IT and the CHRO, and who manages the budget, and where does this conversation sit, and whether or not we're talking about AI as a tech that enables work, or as a workforce that has to sort of sit side by side with various members of the team and have the same type of security and privacy and guardrails. And so it was a really interesting conversation with some of the largest companies around the globe. I also got a chance to share the stage with Jerry Williams, who is the chief people officer for Highgate Hotels, massive hotel chain across the market, talking about, she was very, very eloquent, talking about sort of the challenge of hiring different skill sets and how a single database really makes that powerful for her and capable of her to be a more strategic HR partner. And then they also had Bruce Burrows, who was he's kind of in his own company now, but he used to be the CIO at Sobeys, which is one of the largest retail and grocery markets in Canada. And what was really interesting was his perspective on the CIO, CHRO conversation. Now, he was very much saying, look, CIOs have so much on their plates now. We have to think about not just partnering with them, but really understanding the value that the CIO is bringing to the HR conversation. I won't say that the audience was that generous with that conversation, because there was a little bit of, oh, I don't know. We don't think, because he's like, they're not trying to steal your budget. And the whole room kind of went, uh-huh. So it is definitely this contentious thing right now in the market, but Dayforce did a really nice job of sort of getting conversations started that I think need to happen right now. They did show some product stuff, which I hadn't had a chance to see, Cliff. I know you went to their event last year, but there was some real movement they had made in the product space, which I wanted to just highlight. We'll talk a little bit more. I'll put a LinkedIn post out about it tomorrow probably, but their their VP of product, Senior VP of product, Joshua Valdez was there, along with a really great presentation from one of his colleagues, Amberly. What I saw was, one, they were very clean and concise about what they have and where they're heading, and particularly on the AI front. If you've ever sort of seen Dayforce really focusing on full data model, they're really focusing on payroll, time management, connected with the HR environment, but they've rolled in a lot of the talent conversations with that. So there was a lot of conversation about sort of how those things work together, and the compliance factor, which is what they're winning a lot of awards for, how that fits seamlessly into it. What I really thought was interesting is they started going through their AI conversation. They were very clear about what they have today and what they're going to have in 2025 and what they're going to have in 2026 and beyond. Most of it I'd seen in other places, but it was clear how they were embedding it into these more strategic areas like time management, which I think is a little bit harder for some other organizations there, because really that's Dayforce's starting point, has been the time management conversations. They've been able to leverage that data probably a lot more effectively on the AI side. So lots of help areas, lots of focus on payroll auditing, like we've talked about. But the future looking stuff I thought was really, really interesting. The one that I thought was particularly interesting was sort of an opportunity that they're going to create for HR to basically do a workflow environment, not just sort of a step-by-step workflow environment, but basically where you could sort of drop a bunch of information using some OCR technology and basically kind of help you configure and set up things within the organization that are hard to do right now. I really think it's probably the most interesting thing that I'd seen because it was much more open-minded and innovative about how HR could leverage this technology using kind of a multiple levels of AI. I hadn't seen that yet at any of the other events, so I'll talk a little bit more about it when I put out my LinkedIn post, but really cool to kind of see that, we've been through basically all the big organizations here. A lot of them are saying a lot of the same things. There's no doubt. We're getting ready to actually write a whole article to talk a little bit about kind of what's the comparison between the various big vendors. But also, I think each of them is taking a different stance in whether they're driving with AI, enabling with AI, supporting with AI. And I think that's going to be the big conversation we're going to have this fall, Cliff.
Yeah, I'd say that's a prediction I would definitely bet on. That is definitely the case.
Yeah.
So speaking of, I guess, what companies are doing and how they're expanding, do you want to get into some of the stuff we're seeing on that front?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've got a lot of great topics today. Where do you want to start at, Cliff? Because I know we're kind of trying to wrap some things around some of our technical challenges. So I'll let you start where you think it's most important today.
Well, let's talk a little bit about, this was just such an interesting acquisition that I didn't sort of flag it first until you framed it a certain way. So it's a company called Beeline, and they acquired MBO Partners. So if you don't know Beeline, they are a tool for managing contingent workers, right? So we've talked about that, these are your independent workers, but the company they acquired, MBO Partners, they do the actual sort of engagement of specifically of the workers, right? I guess I don't know how you want to think of it as the content of high value independent workers, right? So these are, tradespeople, a lot of people that you see that we're starting to see more and more in our data set, right? There's more growth in these types of work. And I think it's also a sort of something we see during any time of economic volatility as well. We definitely saw a rise of this during COVID. So it's not surprising that this is happening, but I want to let you kind of explain why this is so interesting, because it was the order of who acquired whom that was so, that once I saw it, I was like, oh, you're right. That is interesting.
Yeah, so what I caught well, first of all, we should probably note that in the survey this year, which we will talk a little bit about before we wrap up today, participation. So in the big annual survey that we do every year, we will have this year for the first time an analysis of the contingent labor, extended labor market solutions. If we get enough responses, that's always the big caveat, but if we get enough responses, we'll be able to give a list of them at an aggregate level and broken down by size. And then we'll also be able to give some user experience and vendor satisfaction ratings, because we do think this is a growing bit. What I really thought was interesting about this conversation, though, is that, what we're seeing here is a mixture of the contingent labor, them buying an EOR instead of the other way. Like, we've seen a lot of EORs kind of buy larger firms, and an employer of record, right, is definitely an organization, like if you're a Paychex or something like that, who's kind of buying up contingent labor tools, right? This time we're seeing a contingent labor tool buy an EOR, and what's interesting here is that there is some legal things between those two worlds that is a little bit sort of, you've got to be careful of. And so I'm assuming Beeline is going to manage that and figure out how that works. But it seems like they're very excited about sort of how that helps them, probably from a more global perspective, but also how to be more strategic in this market. So I think we're going to be interested to see more of this over time. But, independent and workers who maybe have a little bit of an EOR kind of flavor to what they're doing, that will be interesting in how they're tying this together, right?
Yeah, actually, I think it is that sort of legal and compliance-based concerns that probably led to this move, right? Because it is highly complex, both from timekeeping regulations, but also taxing, anything on payroll. When you have these sort of different kinds of labor that you're trying to manage for your business, often in ways that you haven't done before. So kind of putting that all under one roof and helping manage that complexity in that regulatory environment is probably going to be how they lead with this acquisition.
I would agree. So we'll get more data on that, I think, as we go in, right?
Yeah. And Another one, kind of speaking of that global nature expansion, is we're getting some information from the government of Canada, who is going to be using Dayforce now. It all ties together, Stacey. It's all
Yeah, and that wasn't even like we had picked this, like we had sourced this article before I got here this week, and I hadn't even really talked about it, but yeah.
yeah. So I believe it was Phoenix that the government of Canada was using before is their pay system, and will now be using Dayforce. We've mentioned on prior episodes where we saw some news about possible moves for the United States Office of Personnel Management,
Yeah.
looking at vendors too. So this seems to be something that's just happening right now. We're starting to see a move from sort of legacy systems to more modern, I guess you would say, or at least different systems that we're more familiar with. How about that?
Yeah.
And yeah, again, the sort of global expansion of what had been primarily thought of as US based or US focused systems just continues. And clearly when it's something this large, that there's been a lot of time that went into this. This isn't, it's not like a small business that, has a short process of determining who they're going to use and then making that switch. Never easy for anyone, but certainly something as large as the government of Canada makes it pretty significant.
Yeah, I had a quick conversation with Steve, the president and COO here at Dayforce at dinner on this particular topic. One, I mean, they've been working with the government of Canada for a while, so I think this is getting all the red tape about getting announcements like this out is a big thing. But I think it was also interesting to talk about, the complexity of working with any government at that level, right? It means you really have to have a very tight connection oftentimes between payroll and time tracking, because time tracking in the federal environment is very, very strict. There's a lot of regulations and rules around that for various governments, for various reasons, a lot of contracts and labor conversations, right? And I do think that, getting this kind of extensive opportunities is great for most organizations, but they also have to realize it's a lot of support work, right? So many vendors, talk about the positives of doing public sector, doing government entities, but they also have to build up a customer service group that can work within that environment. And that's a big part, I think, of where Dayforce has been spending its time, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There was another interesting story I think both of us saw that's a new product that's out there that sort of shows, whenever there's technological advancement, there's disruption for some of the work we do, but that also means there's new businesses and new jobs as we sort of start to use this. And one of those is a new company, Lanai, that's spelled Lanai. I assume sort of like the porch sort of situation. As we say in the South, we're not as fancy. But Lanai is very interesting, right? Because, Stacey, I've been taking so many of your sort of terms, whether it's the cluster model or whether it is the validation over generation. Another one that you talked about is BYAI, bring your own AI, right? It's like the bring your own device sort of situation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we're actually tracking that again in the survey.
Big issue,
Asked just about the use of AI through your organization, but now we're asking about what about your own? What do you have at ChatGPT? Are you using that at work? Well, now there's going to be a tool, Lanai, that helps companies look at that, the use of AI within different systems and that traffic that's going between your employees and the AI systems. We are very cognizant and very hyper aware of, for instance, our own data being used in AI systems. Please don't. Not please don't. Don't.
Yes.
If you're seeing the
That's
video,
not even asking please anymore. We're just saying don't. Yeah.
yeah. So Lanai is a tool that can help this, and I think it's really important, especially for smaller businesses, right, Stacey?
Yeah, this one I think, because a lot of large companies already have a strong IT group. They already have some tools that do a little bit of tracking of data flow, but we really haven't developed a full set of tools that will track the AI movement inside your organization. And actually I got this off of it, so I wanted to pull it up because I wanted to make sure I got it right. I just started listening to a new podcast called Lead with AI with Tamara Nall, and I would recommend this for anybody who is in this space and trying to look at other podcasts. So just a shout out to Lead with AI. What she does is she interviews young or she interviews entrepreneurs who have started up AI solutions and businesses in the market that are interesting and new and doing some current things. So there's everything from those who are helping reduce the level of trash that you have, right, to something like this where it is really helping at an enterprise level. The owner of this has a lot of experience working in cybersecurity areas, has a lot of experience doing those things. And I was just really interested in seeing how we are going to create tools and technology to manage the new AI tools and technology we have, which we knew was going to happen, but it was nice to see that it's coming out of an area that's not just the big security tools that we've already been aware of, but someone who really was thinking about it from a people perspective, which I liked. So I'd recommend taking a look at this tool. I know we're looking at this tool. I think anybody should have something in their environment that is tracking what's happening on AI and making sure they have all the right safeguards in place. What was really nice to see at this enterprise session I just was at with Dayforce is I had everybody put their hands up about whether or not they knew the ethics or who had some sort of governance in place around ethics for their current AI environments. And I think last year, Cliff, you and I would have asked this, and it would have been a room full of hands that just didn't go up because people hadn't really thought about it. This year at this enterprise level, I saw almost everybody's hand go up when knowing they had some sort of strategy from an ethical perspective on managing their AI. So it's definitely a market that's moving ahead finally.
I'm fascinated to see where that number is. Last year, we saw 64% of companies either didn't have ethical guidelines or didn't know of ethical guidelines, which I always say is the exact same thing. If you don't know about the guidelines, then they don't exist. So I'll be very interested to see how that breaks down, because I would have been shocked too to see the number of hands that went up. That's pretty interesting. But yeah, like I said, it's always fascinating to see how this sort of evolves, right? We have new challenges, and so we've got new tools to face those challenges, and that's what we're here to do, right? That's our mandate. So speaking of sort of tools and interesting ways to use sort of existing companies, tools, Greenhouse, who we've mentioned before, we know Greenhouse, right? HR platform, HR and talent. They are partnering with Clear. That's all capitals, the acronym Clear, CLEAR. Most of you are probably familiar with them in airports, especially in the US, where they sort of work as a pass-through, almost like TSA pre-check in certain places where you can do quick validation for security and identity purposes, which is exactly how Greenhouse is looking to partner with Clear. They're going to have a new tool, Clear One, to help do identification and screening of candidates, something that has been always sort of, I would say, sort of lingering in the background. Anyone that's worked in HR knows that's part of the process, and it's just sort of there. But we haven't really seen too much advancement, but it's become very much in the news for a lot of reasons here, especially in the United States. This need to be able to identify, keep those records, and be able to sort of do that in a fast and hopefully not disengaging way.
Yeah, I mean, they're really looking at what they call our fake or fraudulent applications. And there's been a bit of this going on with AI, because AI is allowing people to sort of submit things at a much more quick, fast basis. There's also been a bit of this, we're seeing, AI generated interviews, which is, I don't know, some of that stuff with different, faces and stuff like that. But I will say there's also a bit of a challenge going on LinkedIn, if you kind of are following the story, where I think Jojo Roque did a really great write-up of how this is going to help the recruiter and what positives it has in the market. There have also been a couple of other recruiters who've been pushing back on this conversation with Greenhouse and wanting to Clear to do this, because there's a perspective for many of them that Clear has a record. And I'll be honest, I have not looked into this, but I'm seeing my connection is unstable. So I'm hoping everyone can still hear me, or give it a few months. There we go. Hopefully we're back on track again. But okay. but there were some really interesting conversations about Clear having some pretty big bias concerns around it, particularly with different nationalities, with different challenges with who they tracked and who they didn't track. What were some of the reasons why they could or could not get Clear access? So again, I think this comes back to that conversation about which technology are we going to use. If verification of a human being is a thing that we have to start doing, what databases are going to be doing that, and how are those databases being used and managed from both a technical perspective, but also from a bias perspective. So watch this story. I think follow both sides of this on LinkedIn, and there's a little bit of it spilling over into some of the Reddit threads and those things. But it is worth, I think, understanding what the various vendors are doing to manage this and to make sure that they are making sure the technology is valuable at a base level for everybody. And it's not precluding people from getting through the process because of certain biases it has built in based off of us being human beings and having data from us as human beings, right?
That's right. I mean, it's sort of the classic thing, and we see it in data too, right? The two main types of errors, type 1, type 2 error, right? You don't want to let people in that aren't supposed to be there, but also you don't want to exclude people that should be in there, right? Those are the two types of mistakes. So being able to sort of manage, and mitigate those type of errors, I think would be very important. So the next story I will probably end up talking about for quite some time. This one is fascinating. When you talked earlier about, okay, this is kind of interesting because of the direction, right? We're now seeing Contingent getting into EOR. This one is fascinating for the same reason, and I think you know where I'm going with this. Grammarly is expanding. They're going to become more of a sort of always-on AI agent working in the background. If you know Grammarly, you probably know them as a sort of grammar checking tool, a sort of more advanced version of spell check, and help you with your grammar and have writing. I've used it. Stacey, I think you've used it too. But they're looking to go beyond that, right? So they have acquisition of Coda, which I believe we talked about on the show. They're going to be finding more productivity uses across platforms in sales. They mentioned marketing, acquisitions, being able to sort of research and coordinate information across platforms that you're using across tools. So I think about, your Googles and your Microsofts that were like, okay, we're a productivity tool that can, and we're going to help you also with the grammar and the spell check. They went the other direction. They're expanding out. I'll be interested to see if they change their name, right, for this reason. Yeah. That's not mentioned. That's just me speculating. But it's also fascinating because of who they're bringing in. I was very deliberate when I mentioned Google there because some of the people that are coming in have very interesting backgrounds. And Stacey, you've done a lot of research on this story, really opened my eyes to the possibilities of this tool. So I'd love to hear more about what you found out.
Yeah, and I think it's important. We've mentioned Grammarly multiple times on this show, and people often kind of go, Grammarly's not an HR tool. And I'm like, but our data, because we follow the voice of the customer, we're not always just talking about what we think is the category. When we asked organizations what was their top, AI tool they were using for HR, Grammarly was in the top 5 and is still in the top 5 in our data set, right? Like it is considered their AI tool of choice, even though it's kind of small but I think whenever you see someone using something a lot, that means there's already adoption. So why not add to it? It's kind of like the Zoom conversation. Now Zoom is competing with Word, right? And Microsoft Office. Grammarly is kind of, I think, going to try and become sort of that in-between orchestrator, as we've been hearing that word a lot. And it's been worth noting, I don't know if you mentioned this, Cliff, when you were mentioning it, that the part of this all came up is that they got a $1 billion infusion of money. With that $1 billion infusion of investor funds and money, they also brought in a new CEO that came from the Coda acquisition 6 months ago. I'm not going to say his name correctly, but I apologize. I think Shishir Mehrotra, right? My apologies for butchering the name, and I should probably go in and I know LinkedIn has this new feature now where you can actually hear the name that I should try. But I looked at Shishir's background, and not only has he come from Coda, but he has a long-standing background as head of technology and product for Google in the YouTube area. He also has a long-standing background as Microsoft program manager of technology. And we also know that the original founders of Grammarly came from the Google environments too. So I see, my sense is, my spidey sense tends to see when you bring in certain people with certain backgrounds, you're going to get a lot of some of the things that you're expecting to see on this platform conversation or this connector conversation. I watch this closely. I think much like people were sort of surprised that Zoom came out with a productivity tool that now has calendar, it now has some version of a Word document tool and has other things they're building in for productivity. I think we're going to see a similar kind of thing with Grammarly, but maybe going in more of the connector model. You might see them become an agent manager. You might see them become a tool that starts to really realign the conversation of what it means to connect data between your sales, your marketing, and your HR and your offices, right? So I really am sort of bullish. Is that the word you're supposed to use? I don't know. I'm not an investor. I'm just kind of I'm very bullish on where this could go, because I think when a market's already being utilized without having to do a lot of investment in it, you're much more likely to get people to sort of acquire that. A really good example is we went from Calendly, which we love that product, to Zoom calendaring, because we were already using Zoom. And when you're already using a product, you just end up tending to sort of roll that in. That's how the market works, right?
Yeah, that's a perfect example of why we're seeing this move towards this cluster model, right? Because you need systems that work together, that integrate, that, you're not exporting data and using it another way. Anyone that has had challenges with AI probably knows that that's when it doesn't become as efficient, right? It's efficient when everything works together. And speaking of that, some more in this news, and it's so fascinating too. Just a quick aside that we've been talking about, this like blurring of the lines between what's HR tech and what's productivity or work tech. I should stop saying that. That line is gone. There's no line. It's just a big swimming pool of tech that that you use in different ways and different spaces. And especially with AI, a company AI.work, which is kind of funny because usually they'd use the .ai, but it's AI.work. They had been in the sort of what they call a stealth period where you're gaining revenue or hoping to gain revenue and investment without being sort of open in terms of, just the sort of, I guess, a form from more of a marketing and legal standing. But anyway, they have raised 10 million in seed funding, and it is going to be a tool not unlike some we've mentioned in a few recent episodes of managing your AI agentic sort of workplace, right? And it's going to be called the AI Worker platform. So being able to sort of manage AI agents as part of operations. We've seen a couple companies sort of dip their toe into how do we sort of handle all these AI agents, and should we classify them as people, or how do we sort of put them in the org chart even? I remember that story. But this is more looking at it from a sort of operations and logistics standpoint of keeping it all in one place. Again, cross-platform, where is everyone at, and what sort of work can we best optimize with these AI agents is the idea of this tool. At least that's how I saw it, Stacey.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think, it's important that there was a lot of investors in this, even in this seed round, right? So I do think you're probably getting a lot of people interested in this topic. But also, I think they were really focusing on expanding the world of RPA, which is robotic process automation, to this AI worker model, which I think is where we're seeing when I really talk to the big enterprise companies, those 5,000 above, when they talk about agents, they are building on top of generally what is already RPA tool sets, right, to do this. And so I do think that's a good place to, a little bit different, some say like Workday with their agentic management model, which is built off of the privacy and security of the workforce, or what we're seeing with ServiceNow, which is kind of built off the privacy and security of your tech area, right? They're kind of going straight at this from an RPA model, where wherever you might have RPA deployed, why would you not have an agentic component to it and manage it appropriately, right? And so I think we're going to see variations of this across the market, right?
Absolutely. And this one is pretty interesting too. We mentioned Google a few times, and Google is in the news because their learning platform, Grow, looks like it is they're not calling it shuttering it. They're saying they're overhauling it. They're refocusing on AI, on things that sort of more directly impact business. There was a time, as we just mentioned just a few moments ago, was Microsoft and Google both. We were starting to see them more at conferences and trade shows as they were expanding into this sort of HR tech world. So it is interesting to see the sort of comings and goings of some of these companies as they try and figure out where they best fit into sort of an existing ecosystem, sort of where in the cluster do they belong, and which systems they want to prioritize.
Yeah, and this one's interesting. I think we have to note it, right, that this product or tool is the internal Google learning platform, not externally focused. But the point about this is that it has a ton of content. Like there was when we laugh about basket weaving, there was basket weaving on this platform. There's anything you could possibly want to learn was focused on this platform. And if you kind of read the articles around this, what they were really saying within Google is that they were refocusing what they wanted their employees to focus on. So they were reassessing all of their content with an eye towards AI and the business needs. And that it's a little bit of a shift away from the learn anything model that has been really big with Google to the learn what we think is going to be the next generation of focus that we have. And that's an internal conversation we're seeing go across the market. Every organization is trying to figure out how they keep engagement up, figure out how they help their employees become educated on the AI market, and still end up sort of doing day-to-day business. Like this is the thing we're hearing like across, everyone that we're talking to. And I don't know all the organizations are doing it very well because there are a lot of, it sounds like a lot of employees who are a little bit up in arms over this change and this overhaul within the Google environment, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Fascinating stuff. And, I know we're sort of coming up on time. I want to talk about a couple other interesting stories. And as always, we'll have the links to all of this in our LinkedIn, on the YouTube, etc. One report that you love to see every year, or it's not really every year, but when it comes out, from Mary Meeker and her group.
Yeah.
She had one on trends in artificial intelligence. So we also track, but she goes into so much depth about not just usage, but also relative cost, how much focus is on developing the hardware behind it, the types of usage, all that stuff. Really fascinating stuff. One that was highlighted that we saw was also sort of the level of ability to sort of seem more human, right? To come across as more human. We've been talking quite a lot about the sort of use cases, right? But what about the way we think of AI sort of broadly as a people, right? Of truly artificial intelligence. And in a test that was done, 87% of people, when given, one of these responses that's coming through the chat is from AI and one of them is from a human. And 87% felt confident that the AI chat was actually human, showing that the level of advancement, at least in that sort of mimicry of human sort of speech patterns and thought, has really advanced strongly. Of course, that impact on how that affects businesses' abilities to achieve tasks is something to be seen, but it is a massive report. Like I said, the link is in there. It's very visual centric. I think people should all take a look at this.
Yeah, Mary Meeker is one of the few things that have been going on longer than the annual HR system survey. She has been a big, she followed the rise of the internet. I really enjoy her perspectives in the market and where those are at. So this is one of my favorites. I love she focuses on the Turing test, right? And in this conversation, and I think it's well worth your time to spend some time on it. And it kind of gets to our next conversation, Cliff, which is the idea that Reddit has filed a lawsuit against AI startup Anthropic. I think there was another, I don't know if they're still doing a lawsuit or not, right? So I think there's been back and forth on this, but the idea is that there's this conversation about where is AI getting its information from, right? And some of the AI tools have licensing agreements. Some have made licensing agreements after they got sued, like with the New York Times for OpenAI. And some are trying to go around the solution. And we know we're waiting to see kind of at what point will LinkedIn start to pull their opportunities. This was one of the things we got early on in the web when they were first doing sort of the web crawlers and pulling information and aggregating it. There was a lot of sites that eventually just had to close up or stop doing what they were doing because there was no more financial value for them gathering data because people weren't coming directly to them. They were just going to the aggregators like Google and Yahoo. So Cliff, this one you're probably a little more familiar with. You know more Reddit than I do. Do you think this lawsuit is going to actually take place and Anthropic is kind of at the center of this, right?
Right. So Anthropic, that's the company that if you are kind of more using the just online on your own, that's who makes Claude, or Claude is the name of the one you would use. Yeah, it's interesting because there had been agreements between Reddit and a few other platforms, but as you mentioned, there had been a whole thing about data scraping of LinkedIn, and it was its case. Usually these type of things tend to resolve outside of court, right? You kind of have to get the proceedings going. but some sort of agreement is reached between the parties. There's also an ongoing one right now with Disney and OpenAI and a few of the other platforms. I believe Midjourney, for instance, I believe is the one Disney has, so on image generation, right? Where did you get these images, and is the recreation truly fair use, et cetera, et cetera. Disney has a long history of shaping copyright and trademark laws here in the United States and I think it's globally. So yeah, these type of cases are very interesting because for any of these systems to truly work, right? We just gave that cool set. Oh, it's so neat that it's sort of passing the Turing test. For that to happen, it needs massive data sets, right? And, so their ability to gather this information and then reuse it really is the crux of our ability then to use it for work. But again, AI has become such a big catch-all term. And, I'm as guilty as anyone else for using it. Stacey, you've often called it just intelligent tools. I think that is a much better phrasing, right? Because it covers all sorts of things. I mentioned, the ability to detect anomalies. You don't need massive data sets for that. You just need it to be able to get to the point where there's some pattern recognition. That's what all this really is. So, yeah, I think it'll be very interesting because there's a lot of, sort of search engine optimization, if you want to call it that, where, people look to Reddit for a source, right? And your ability to appear in Reddit sometimes is a high level of sort of validation of, where people are going for information. You have your classic sort of Wikipedia, but also people use Reddit in that way, right? So if you're able to get that just insane amount of information, then you're going to have a leg up. But at the same time, you might be putting yourself at risk. So it will be interesting. There's so much, it's really fascinating. It can be very scary when there's these new technologies, but it's fascinating to watch sort of everyone sort of kind of catch up. We were talking about ethical guidelines. This is where it comes from.
Yeah, it comes right here. And I don't know that we'll have time to get into the story, but one of the ones that we wanted to talk about was that there had been an article that had done some research on current AIs being developed and how they were, I think the term they're using is being kneecapped, which is like basically they were limiting current AIs, new AIs, the ability to be built because ChatGPT has so many people are putting content out that was just based off of ChatGPT. I just had a vendor who posted a post today that I saw it, and they were referencing workforce planning based off of what a company, Sierra Cedar, had said. And I was like, well, I know my old company, Sierra Cedar, is no longer having that conversation without us in it. So I'm assuming that somewhere along the line, that AI for that vendor had picked up an old report we had run and placed that in this little blog post or LinkedIn post they had posted. So I just kind of nicely texted them and say, hey, you may be talking about the new report that we have, and you might want to mention Sapient Insights Group, which is the name that we are under now. But that is right now, there's so much proliferation of content that maybe is either inaccurate or not quite right, or kind of the same stuff that ChatGPT's already created that they're already finding that's having an impact on other AIs being built, right? So this is going to be an issue we're going to have to address in the market. Cliff, we only have probably about another 5 minutes. I know there were some really good stories. One was the pay scale report. Maybe we touch base on that, and then some of the other ones we kind of hold off to for the following week. We have a little bit more time, maybe, because we're going to do another session, I think, the holiday week, and that might be a good time to catch some of those other ones.
Yeah, so no smooth segue here. My love for trying to link everything together. But I think we've talked so much about AI, but look, we love talking about everything under the sun when it comes to HR. So compensation, this is definitely an area that we are very tied into. Our CEO Terry Zipper was just at the World of Work conference. We are all about this, and this was just a fascinating report about compensation that came out from PayScale, showing all sorts of the gaps between perception and reality, whether people think that they're being paid fairly or not. One I would like to highlight from a ton of great reports, again, the link will be there, was that employees who believe that they're treated unfairly, right? So you remember, that's the idea of compensation. It has a lot of different tools. It can be used for bringing people in for talent acquisition, but it also has to do with engagement and how people feel about it, right? So knowing where your benchmarks are and people's perception of it, it's not just numbers, right? There's that human element. So those that believe that they're paid unfairly are 45% more likely to look for a new job, right? You're basically half as likely to leave, right? If you believe you're paid unfairly, so understanding the market and why people might feel that way is so important, because it really has to do with whether people are leaving your company. And plus, not mentioned in the report, but just knowing people, knowing, HR, if someone's looking for a new job, they're not going to be as productive as they are even before they've left, right? You're losing that person pretty much automatically. They're not going to be at their highest level of engagement. You're going to see drop-offs across the board long before they leave. So addressing it goes beyond just, okay, we want to do this so people don't leave. It's really about getting people feeling good about their jobs so they can help others succeed and help your business succeed as well. Yeah, that's my soapbox for that. And we can sort of wrap up. I want to thank everybody, all of the listeners, anyone that checks us out on YouTube. A lot of people have been coming up to us at events saying they like the show, they listen to the show, big part of their drive or their day. We really thank you. We love all the comments that we receive. We love hearing anything that's out there. I also want to give special thanks to everyone from our team that makes this show happen. Summer Oriano from our marketing department. I want to thank Kelly and the amazing work that she does over at Brand Method Media. And anyone that I've forgotten who's usually in that outro, I do apologize. Please reach out though. We want to hear from you. Stacey mentioned also that we do have the survey. By the time this goes out, the survey will most likely be closed. But if you have a link, we would suggest that you go ahead, try the link, see if you're able to get into the survey, finish it if possible, because we want to make sure that every single person's voice is heard. And thank you so much again for being a part of this. Stacey, I can see you're back. I mentioned Kelly, mentioned Summer from our team. Who else have I forgotten? I was like, I forgot. I know there's another one.
We usually mention Cole as well,
Yes.
but my not going to hold. I can see already. So just thank everyone for us. Next week we'll have our regular outro, but we really appreciate it. But definitely take the survey. You got a few more days if you're hearing this today. So
wonderful. Thank you so much. And we'll be, like you said, boiling hot, 104 degrees temperature of spilling the tea on HR Tech. Bye, everybody.